Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
Hey there, I'm Julie Lyles-Carr of the All Mom Does podcast, where we are in a series on mental health and mental wellness. Let's jump right into the next episode. Today on the All Mom Does podcast, I have Kristen Wetherell with me, and she's going to talk to us about a topic that, you know, when we kicked off this entire new series on mental health and wellness, it was what I raised my hand and said, I am definitely feeling this. So we're going to connect those dots for you today. Kristen, thanks so much for being with me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's make sure that the listener gets introduced to you. Tell us where you're from. Tell us about your family. And I want to know if you're a coffee or a tea person. So just jump in and you unpack that for me.
Yes. Well, I'll answer your last question first. I am a coffee person, although I do drink tea. But if I had a choice, first thing in the morning, give me that cup of coffee.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm on decaf now, but still I identify as a coffee person. So
yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm married to Brad, who is a pastor at our church. And we've been married coming up now on 8 years, which I can't believe. We have 2 little kids. My daughter is 4.5. My son is 2. And yeah, our lives are very full. I mean, you know how it is. It's never a dull moment here in the Wetherell household. I'm a mom during the week. I stay home full time. And then when I have opportunities, I write, which I just absolutely love. I love to open God's word and point out what's there and help people see it. And, you know, Lord willing, love the Lord more and live by it. So love writing too.
And you are from an area that I hold near and dear to my heart in Chicagoland. My oldest daughter lives there. And as part of this series, we actually also had an opportunity to interview Jeannie Stevens, who has a new book coming out called What's Here Now, which is an interesting episode. So you guys are practically neighbors as far as I'm concerned.
Oh,
not
nice.
that Chicago is not massive and huge and, you know, you guys may not know each other at all, but I'm like, oh, well, you're all from Chicago. You must all be friends. So
yeah. Isn't it funny how we think that way? I know. Chicago is huge.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's such a great place. I just love it. Now, I don't want to string the listener along too long because I want to jump back to what I referred to at the very beginning. Your book came to me at a time where I went, yeah, that is something that resonates with me and a challenge that I'm feeling right now. You provided a statistic that I think is really fascinating. And that statistic is that 41% of moms report feeling extremely burned out. And then 51% who are working outside of the home say they feel that way. And I would have to think that it's even possible that we're going to see those statistics rise even more as we have an opportunity to see what really took place during the pandemic, how people were feeling. This idea of being just fried. I actually had the opportunity to meet with someone that I had worked closely with in ministry last week for the first time since the pandemic happened. She and I got to sit down and just have some time to talk. And she reminded me that even previous to the pandemic, I was saying things like, I'm feeling really crispy. Yeah, I was like, oh, I forgot that I said that. And that kind of correlates to, you know, I'm getting crispy, burned out. Okay. So yeah, maybe I was self-diagnosing even back then. But I do think it's important first to identify what we're calling burned out. So how do you think about it when somebody says to you, I'm starting to feel really burned out, or you start looking at the statistics that are coming across that we're seeing a lot of now with people saying they're burned out, even as we are heading into what a lot of people were longing for, which was kind of being able to get back out there. Some of us are going, oh, wait a minute. I don't know that I was in the best headspace before all this started. And so here we are now. So how do you identify what it means to be burned out?
Yeah. Man, well, when I think about that, especially in my own experience, I think about kind of coming to the end of myself and no longer having what I need to do what I'm called to do in terms of my own strength and my own resources. So I've come to a place where, you know, my resource bin is empty, my tank is low, whatever you want to call it. But I think it has a lot to do with just feeling like you've come to the end and I don't have anything more to give. So that's what I think about when I think of burning out.
Right. I love that designation because there are those things that we continue to do just because we have to do them. but it's like joy has left the building. We don't feel as engaged anymore. And I heard someone say recently, and I thought this was interesting, that burnout is different than depression. That in depression, you can almost hit a place where you just simply can't take one more step. With burnout, you keep taking the steps. You just keep getting up and doing the thing you've got to do. It's just that the passion for it and the full technicolor of it and the soundtrack that should go with some of these things in our lives is missing. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, I think so. And I think a lot of workers feel that. A lot of moms feel that. Especially when your job involves something that is 24/7 or very close to it. So, and when you're a parent, you don't have the option of being off the clock. You don't. Even if your kids aren't with you in the moment, they're on your mind. They're weighing on your heart. And so I think probably all work involves it to a point. But I that resonates with me so much. This idea of, oh my goodness, I'm doing all this work. My hands are so busy and I can't stop because I have to keep little people alive. But man, my heart's just not in it today.
Kristen, too, and one of the antidotes that we throw out there a lot of times is this idea of, well, you just need a breather. Just go take a day away to roam Target, or just have a moment to go do something that you enjoy for a little bit, or go for a run, or have lunch with that friend. And those things do help. And I have to say, as I was realizing my own crispiness, I was trying to engage more of those things intentionally. But they didn't necessarily fix what was going on. Do you think sometimes we're trying to patch over the burned out places in our lives with more activity that we think is going to help?
Yeah. I mean, I resonate. That also resonates with me. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic when everything shut down and we couldn't do anything anymore and I couldn't schedule us anymore
Right.
and I couldn't see people anymore. That shook me more than anything else. And it just exposed in my heart this perpetual need for movement, this perpetual need for action. I'm actually super terrible at rest. And so I think that those things can be really good gifts, if we receive them as rest. I think we have to ask, are they actually restful for me? But I don't think that they're like this, end all be all solution. I think that they're good gifts, but I don't think that they're an ultimate thing.
I like that designation of the difference between a gift, a moment, but a true solution. I find too that as a mom and as a woman, when I hear people say, well, it's impossible to multitask, I go, well, then come over and hang out with me because I've been multitasking for a long time. It was the only way that I knew to keep us moving forward. And when I take a look at that level of activity, it was driving the kids to the next thing while on the business call, while also my mind keeping track of the fact that I needed to run back by the pharmacy and pick up whatever. I mean, I have known no other existence as a woman and as a mom than to multitask all the time. And so even in times, Kristen, that I would tell you that I was trying to slow the roll of how much stuff we were doing, I was still finding, even in those moments, and I was doing it during the pandemic when our schedule eased up, but I found I was still trying to cram so much into every moment. What level do you think multitasking, even when multitasking feels incredibly necessary, what level does that play in this sense of burnout?
Well, I sometimes wonder, multitasking can be necessary, or switch tasking, or whatever you want to call it. All mom does, right? It's all of these things that we have on our plate. I once heard somebody say, we don't have a plate, we have a platter. Like there are so many things on our platter. And that is something that God in his kindness has called us to do, and that's just a wonderful stewardship to be able to work for our families and for the Lord ultimately. But I sometimes wonder for myself if, like we mentioned before, if keeping busy is a cover up for my lack of satisfaction in the Lord. And so because I'm not actually sure that his promise is true when he says he's going to provide me life and life abundant, I'm kind of over here just trying to figure out if I can find that life somewhere else. And it's actually a little bit scary to trust him.
Right.
It's a little bit scary to lay down all the other things that vie for my attention, that make me feel important, and trust that he's the one who is my identity at the end of the day when I rest my head upon my pillow at night. So I think some of it is necessary. Some of it is, the joyous part of the work that we're doing. And I think some of it is probably the frantic, self-driven / culturally influenced need to be someone, to fill ourselves with contentment. And so I think we need to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me, too, that in the topic of multitasking, even when it feels, or switch tasking, even when it feels incredibly necessary just to do the things that need to get done, it prevents us from feeling present. And I'm always 14 steps ahead. I'm not necessarily in this moment because of the level of multitasking that I'm doing. Now, I want to talk about this very tenderly, this next thing, because I served for many years on a church staff. You are married to a pastor, I'm sure, exceptionally involved in the life of your family's church. And churches run on the lifeblood of people who are willing to volunteer their time and spend time doing a variety of things. And yet part of where I think sometimes as members of faith communities, can we get confused that when we talk about finding satisfaction in God, finding connection with God, letting God be the source that we're going to when we're tired, when we're trying to do things out of our own effort, do we need to be cautious that that is a different thing than being up at the church building all the time and volunteering for everything?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think our tendency to seek purpose, to fill our time, to even distract ourselves can infiltrate the realm of the church and serving. I think something that has been helpful to me as a pastor's wife and as a mom, I've been spending a lot of time in the Gospel of John lately, and I've been really helped by two things. One, Jesus's unwavering focus on doing his Father's will. He says, my food is to do the will of the one who sent me. And so we're not called to please man. Are we called to serve? Absolutely. But I think the core question is our motive to do God's will? And so I think if we're spending time with him, if we're in his word, if we're, surrounding ourselves with his people who can speak his truth into our lives, I think we'll have a clearer sense of what that is. How do you want me to serve, Lord? So I'm not just frantically, pouring forth all my efforts and getting burnt out, even in the realm of serving the church. The second thing is an account at the end of John where Peter, is concerned about what the disciple John is doing and what Jesus has planned for him. And Jesus looks at him and I'm sure, lovingly says, Peter, what is that to you? You follow me. And so I think that is a really wonderful command and calling for us, is to say, don't look side by side. Look at me, look at the Lord, and follow me. And, like I mentioned, we can receive counsel from friends and wise folks about what that might mean for us. But I think that's the heart of it. We're not serving in order to please people, in order to even please ourselves. We're serving to please the Lord and to bring him glory.
It sounds to me that one of the things we need to be on the lookout for in the phenomenon of feeling crispy or feeling burned out is comparison. And I know that we talk about this a lot in the female space and how we are bombarded more than ever with things that can be comparison items when it comes to social media and all of those things. But I have to tell you, Kristen, in my early motherhood, we didn't have social media. And I've said this before, I'm sure the listener will probably remember if they've been a longtime listener of the podcast. I felt bad enough just getting Southern Living once a month in terms of what I thought my house should look like and all of the things. And I do wonder if part of our burnout comes from that trap, just like you're referring to in scripture, of looking at what God's doing in someone else's life and feeling like that's the thing we're supposed to achieve. And so then we're piling more and more on, far more than can fit in a 24/7 model. Do you see that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's one of the primary influences toward discontentment, envy, jealousy, restlessness that I see in myself, in my own heart. I met with a pastor's wife, several months back, and she also raised her kids in the era, pre-social media. And she said, I just don't envy you guys at all, because you have so many, wonderful resources at your fingertips, but also so many options. And she's like, how do you sort through it all? And I just said, it's so hard. It is so hard to not feel like you're not living up to expectations. You're not, being mom enough. You're not crafting with your kids well enough, or putting them in the right activities, or schooling them in the right ways. And so I think it's a major influence. And I think that it's dangerous. And we have to be really on guard for how the internet and social media could be contributing to burnout. I think that we need to take breaks for that reason too, and give ourselves time away from looking side to side.
I like the way you frame that, because so often I think that we make these influences like HGTV and social media and all of the things, we make it the evil. And obviously there are things that we know that those tools can be used for evil means, but you're right. It's really sometimes just about all the options that exist and feeling like we need to hit every option. I laugh at myself because I take a look at something, and this is a very surface level, but I can take a look at a house that seems very, very contemporary. I'm like, ooh, I love that. And then I'll take a look at a house that's a farmhouse and I'll go, oh, I love that. And then I'll take a look at a house that is more this grand millennial style. I'm like, oh, I like that. Because there are just so many great options. Instead of just honing in on the one thing, I'm swirling around trying to do all these things. And that's just a really apt metaphor, you're right, for the ways that we continue to try to grapple and push things into our lives out of this place of feeling like we've got to encompass all of the options. That's a really great delineation between those two things. $32.8 million Americans under the age of 65 are uninsured. 32.8 million. And a lot of those people don't have insurance because of the cost, or they don't have access to it through their work, or because they're self-employed and haven't found an affordable option. I found a great solution I want you to know about, one that is helping so many families have top quality healthcare offerings at an affordable price. Altrua Health Share is a membership of like-minded, health-conscious people. The Altrua Health Share membership shares in each other's medical costs and has features like pooled office visits, telemedicine, telecounseling, prescription discounts, and more. If you want to see how much you can save on your healthcare costs, go to familyhealth.family. I think you'll find, just like I did, that Altrua Health Share can give you the peace of mind you're looking for when it comes to taking care of your family's healthcare needs. So go to familyhealth.family and let them know that I sent you. Altrua Health Share, where we believe in caring for one another. You touch on in some of your writing that part of our issue too, and this has been something that really I saw start coming into fullest flame maybe about 15 years ago, is this idea of grit, grind, hustle, push, do all the things. And people who really, that is their platform. That is what they are pounding all the time. And now that we have all these great options as women, we need to be doing all these things, and we need to be pushing ourselves so hard. There's the obvious correlation between being burned out and feeling like you're just having to work all the time. But how does the messaging of that kind of a culture, and it feels like it's specifically toward women. I don't know that it's really changed that much in tone for men. How does that messaging toward women lead us to a place where we feel like we're less than, where it reduces our satisfaction, where it creates a disconnect between ourselves and our children, or ourselves and our churches, or ourselves and our homes? How does that happen?
Yeah, well, I think that message is demanding from us something that we can never give. It's calling us to be something that God never called us to be, which is, infinite, omnipresent, omniscient. It's all of these lies that social media and other platforms and, digital opportunities, whatever you want to call them, can make us believe are true about us. I can be everywhere all the time. Only God can be those things. And He never called us to that. When He created us, He actually created us with limits. And those limits are for our blessing, so that we will actually turn to Him and not to ourselves and not to all of these other things. So absolutely, I think the culture of hustle has deeply influenced us toward burnout in what we're doing. And I think it's caused us to not only elevate the self, so how can I become greater, but it's caused us to be tempted to forget, believers who love the Lord, that the way up is actually the way down.
Mm-hmm.
And that, the God of all the universe, Jesus, who had every right to stay on his heavenly throne, actually condescended. He came down and he clothed himself in human flesh in order to serve his people. That is actually the definition of greatness, according to him. In John 12, he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." So dying feels like death, right? Like it's not a natural thing for me to want to die to my own ambition and desires, and instead to say, Lord, I trust you with what you desire for me. But Jesus is telling us that it's going to bear a ton of fruit in our hearts, for his glory. And that can look different for everyone, whatever that fruit may be. But I think we've believed the lie that greatness equals more, when actually it means becoming less and following in the example of Christ and trusting in his life that's being lived through us by the Spirit. It's like we can only serve joyfully in what we're doing day in and day out if we're doing it through the power of the one who has served perfectly on our behalf.
I got to confess, Kristen, I'm the first one to look at the idea of being burned out, feeling disconnected, having too much on my platter, and to start looking for tools. I need a better planning system. I need a label maker. I need better containers. Yeah. If I could just get my pantry color coordinated, then everything would be fine. And those things can make us feel better. But you take what is going to feel like a really counterintuitive approach in your new book, Humble Moms, How the Work of Christ Sustains the Work of Motherhood. It's a beautiful book. The cover is just gorgeous. And I have to tell you, the cover attracted me, but it was the combination of the title with the idea of burnout. And then you're saying humble moms. And that almost seems to be counterproductive in a sense, because in some ways, I think as women, I feel like I'm being humble. I'm doing all the things to take care of everybody, and I'm fried. So I'm really curious to hear the way that you define what it means to be a humble mom and how that becomes the thing that is good medicine toward our burnout for those who feel like they're already living in a place where they're already ignoring their own needs and putting themselves last in the line and all of those things. How did you make that correlation? Because it's such a beautiful way of looking at it, but it doesn't seem obvious at first in a sense.
Yeah. Well, so the story behind the whole book is that I was, in my own trenches of motherhood and trying to understand this disconnect between my hands and my heart. So I'm so busy all the time, but I feel so weary and I love my kids, but this is so hard and I don't always like what I'm doing. So what is God calling me to in these moments, in this really long season that I'm going to walk through as a mom? And the passage that I was reading, I think I was just in my Bible reading plan, was Philippians 2, where Paul is talking about the humility of Christ. He says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." So that sounds like moms, right? We are constantly putting aside self, or so we think, to care for the interests of others. But notice he's talking about the heart there, right? He's not just talking about what we're doing. He's talking about why we're doing it. And then he says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant." And then he goes on to talk about all that Jesus did as a humble servant. He lived this perfect life. He died and then he rose again. And now he's seated at the right hand of the Father. And someday every knee will bow to him. And I remember looking at this and saying, holy cow, the humility of Jesus runs throughout his entire ministry. So not just the atonement, not just that he died for me, but that he came for me down into the flesh, that he ministered on this earth in a humble spirit. Yes, he died to take his people's place and rose so that we would have life. And he's serving me right now at the right hand of the Father. And when he comes back to take me home to glory, he's going to do it himself. He's going to serve me forever. And this idea of the God of all the universe being such a humble servant like blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I had just never really meditated on this before. And so I'm probably, rabbit trailing here and losing track of your original question, but I think that that's what matters so much. When we get to, what is humility as a mom? It's not just, grumbling while I kind of set aside what I'm doing to care for my kid. It's that I am doing all things, whether glamorous or not, to the glory of God because he sees me and because he is the one serving me as I serve my kids. So we're not just talking about the things that we're doing, but the heart behind them and beneath them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it seems to me that this combination, if we look at burnout as sometimes having those fingers into it that have to do with how we're publicly demonstrating how we're living our life and how we're handling our kids and all the places we're trying to get to and all of the things. And that can lead to burnout, no doubt, just being on all the time for everybody. This beautiful idea that to be reminded again that the greatest among you will be the one who serves. And not to the place where we're talking about crossing boundaries, and not to discourage the mom who feels like she's scrambling 1,000 miles an hour and is really struggling to make any inroads.
Right.
But that idea that you are seen and what you are doing does count. And the beautiful point you made that we were not designed to be limitless in this life. And that is a message that is hard for those of us who are really wanting to grow and do things and have big dreams. We don't like somebody saying there actually are limits in this life. One of them is simply time, 24/7. And I will tell you, Kristen, I have battled that for so long. I have not wanted to believe there are only 24 hours in a day and 7 days a week. And I can remember going through a book many years ago now, but the author had you walk through and write down everything that you did in a day and give it an assignment of time. And then she also said, now you also need to add in 7 hours for sleep and an hour somewhere of personal care, just hygiene, getting dressed, that kind of thing, and eating meals. And what is the time signature that you come up with? And I think mine was 36 hours.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it was this whole, awareness all of a sudden of going, but God designed human beings to need sleep and to need maintenance. And so there have to be things on these lists that are not mine to do. And that was humbling and it was healing. That's that correlation I think that you make that is really powerful, is we have to be humbled enough to understand that when we hit that place of burnout, there are probably things on the list that aren't ours to do. Now, what encouragement do we give a mom who may be in a really challenging season in her marriage, or maybe needing to caregive for a parent, or for a mom who has a child who is differently abled and that child requires an intense level of care and there just aren't the finances and the support to help come around? What do we say to that mom who she does her list, and her list is not necessarily replete with both the chores and the chosen things that she wants to do and achieve? Hers is just front to back, truly in a season of scrambling and trying to take care of. And her burnout comes from something that's a very different place. What do we say to that mom in this moment where there may not be things that can come off the list and it isn't about comparison?
Two things come to mind. One is something that my senior pastor said once in a sermon about John 10:10, where Jesus says, I've come to give them life and life abundant. He said, Jesus has more to give to you than you have yet to receive from him. And so I'm not going to pretend to know what that mom is feeling and doing and walking through. I have my own responsibilities and my own level of weariness and joy over here. But when there are no seeming resources, tangible things that I can hold on to get me that rest or that help, I think you have a really unique, blessed opportunity that others may not realize that they need to run with all of your might to Jesus Christ and to cast yourself upon him and to really trust that promise. And then to ask of him, to plead with him, to give what he's promising. Okay, Jesus, you say that you have more to give me than I have yet to receive. Would you give it? I have to do another day. So I don't need just strength that I can, come up with on my own. I need you to give me supernatural strength today. And then watch him come through, ask him for eyes to see his presence, ask him for eyes to see the answers to your prayers, and know that, this is not only the God of all, but the man of sorrows who clothed himself in flesh, and he knows what it is to be burdened. He knows what it is to be with broken people, with the suffering. He knows what it is to suffer. And I think that also brings a ton of comfort, just to know that Jesus is not just high and mighty, kind of like, well, you just do this thing up here because I'm commanding you to, but he's next to you. He actually walked with you through it so that you would know that you're not alone. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, I would say, I would just beg you, if you're not part of a local church, to be part of a local church, because there you will find help. You will find the hands and feet of Christ. I cannot adequately express in words what a gift our church has been to us in a really hard season, various hardships, but they have truly been the compassion of the Lord to me. And I think you might be surprised that just when you think, there's no one to help me, there's no help to be had, to see the church step up is a really beautiful gift. So I would encourage you, if you're not part of a local church, to attend one, to become a member, to commit yourself to them and let them commit themselves to you.
I so agree with you, Kristen. I am floored at the women in the faith communities I've been part of through the years in the various cities in which we've lived. They were the ones who often, when I kind of hit a point of thinking, oh my, I need some help. I feel like I'm going under. And sometimes even when I didn't know or didn't have the humility to raise my hand and say, I need some help, I'm going under. The faith community that I had been so blessed to find myself in, and the women in that community who understand that sense of doing all the things and having dreams and having responsibilities, and they're only being 24/7 in the day. Those women came alongside me in strength. I was honored to hopefully be able to come alongside other women in that situation, hopefully in strength, that at the times when we can feel our weakest, other people can show up for us in a really powerful way. And then we get to reciprocate. It's something that I don't want people to miss out on. I know church can be messy. I know that you may have had a situation in your life that somebody really disappointed you in a faith community. And yet there is still so much good, so much help, so much healing that can come when you are connected and you are shoulder to shoulder and arm to arm with people who really want to serve in the same kind of way. Such a great reminder. Well, Kristen, tell listeners where they can find out more about you, where they can find the book, Humble Moms, and just get us connected with all the places you are.
Yeah, sure. So my website is KristenWetherell.com, and that is probably the best place where you can look at stuff related to the book and find out where you can get that. I'm also on Instagram, so you can connect with me there.
All right, go find. We'll make sure that gets in the show notes. Rebecca puts those out. Kristen, thank you so much for being with me and helping me explore a little bit further, helping the listener understand a little bit more about this thing that a lot of us are experiencing, this burnout, where we feel disconnected from the things that we really have always loved and want to do. Thank you so much for reminding us that sometimes the humility and humbleness of raising our hands, saying we need help, and learning to lean on God a little more fully can be just the ticket. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Julie.
Head over to All Mom Does on the socials. You'll find us at All Mom Does on Instagram and All Mom Does on Facebook. And let us know so far what your favorite episode is when it comes to this series that we're doing on mental health and mental wellness. Would you do that for me? Go check out All Mom Does on the socials and let us know how these episodes are impacting you, who has been the guest who's impacted you the most so far. I would love to hear from you. Also, check out those show notes. Rebecca puts those together for us, and it's got all the information that you need from this week's episode. I'll see you next time for another incredible installment, another great episode in our series on mental health and mental wellness here on the All Mom Does podcast.